Hi guys, in this tutorial we'll create a rest assured framework from scratch with testng. This is our goal. We'll create a rest assured framework from scratch. We will run the test in parallel with testng. Then we'll add our code to Git and finally run the test using Jenkins and Git. I will be using IntelliJ IDE, but you can use any IDE you prefer. We will try to cover point 1 and 2 in this video. Git and Jenkins will be a separate video. So let's get started. Let's create a new Maven project with name Rest Assured. First, we'll add all the dependencies we need in our POM file and build our POM file. We will add testng, Rest Assured, JSON and JSON path for JSON parsing. Since I have these dependencies versions already in my local Maven repository, so it will try to auto-populate the values. You can also simply Google Maven dependency, example Maven dependency for testng and get the versions. Let's create our REST base class now, which will define our request specification and REST methods. We will create it in Java package in main. Here we need to import three things from REST assured. First, REST specification, which will contain our REST call specification. Second, response, which will hold our response. And third, given, which returns an object of type request specification. Now let's create our constructor. Before the constructor, we'll create objects of request specification and a map for headers. In the constructor, we will set the basic headers like content type, initialize the request with given, and set the accept type for response. The map for headers will have key as string and object as value. As you can see, I have given the response acceptance type as JSON and the content type as JSON. If we need to create some other type, we can create a parameterized constructor as well. Now let's add the URL to the REST-based class and a constructor for it. The parameterized constructor will call the default constructor using the this command. This way, we can either initialize our REST base with or without URL. We will now define the generic methods for REST. We will add REST get method without any headers and with headers, and similarly the post methods. You can also add the put and delete methods. For the post method, we may need to add the body. We can add string or object as the body. Here we will use the string body method. Now that our basic methods with and without headers are set, let's write some methods for JSON response parsing. For JSON parsing, we will use JSON provider and JSON path from the JWay library. First, we need to create an object of response, which will store our response. In the function parameter, we will define a string, which should be the path to the property in JSON which we want to parse. We will use the configuration class provided by JWay and use its default configuration, which returns an configuration object, and use that to parse the response by converting it to a string, and finally storing it in an object. We will find the path provided in the function parameter in our object using JSON path. Now let's just add one more method to get the status code. The response class itself provides the method for it. One thing I forgot to mention is the relaxed HTTP validation method. I will be making call to SSL without the certificate, so I'll be using this method. For your case, if you want, you can not use this method and directly do the get or post call. This is it for the base class. Let's take a look at the REST API we'll be automating. No, we will not be automating Google. I have hosted a simple RESTful service written in Python online, and we will be automating that. We will parse the response and validate. If you want to learn how to create REST API in Python, let me know in the comments. I can create a separate series for that. For now, let's create a new class called healthcheck. We will create it in Java package. In this class, we will define all the APIs supported by our service and also how the URL needs to be formed. In the constructor, we will take the scheme, host and port as parameter and build our URL using it. For the healthcheck API, we will first create an object of our REST base and pass the URL, appending the healthcheck path to it. Then we will call the get method in REST base and finally return the REST base to the calling test for validation. As you can see, we have defined the URL structure and the API from the service which we need to automate. Now we are all set to write our tests. Let's create that class. We should ideally create the class in test package. For simplicity, I'll create it in Java package. In this test class, first we'll use the before class and parameters annotation from testng to get the scheme, host and port from our testng XML. Let me show you how to do that. Now let's create an object of our health class and initialize it in our init method. Now we are all set to write our first test. We will use the test annotation for the test and add some description to it. We will call the getHelp method and store the REST base object it returns and use it for asserts. Here as you can see, we are asserting the status code using the assert equals, which is also provided by testng. For the JSON, we need to give the path we need to check. This is how we give the path, dollar, dot and the property name. The last thing remaining is to make this test parallel. For that, we will add three parameters. First, thread pool size, which means the total number of threads to be invoked. Second, invocation count, the total number of times this test needs to be invoked. And finally, the timeout duration. So let's add them. Now let's add our testng file. We will add the XML in the resources folder. In the testng file, we will add the parameter we defined in our test and add our test class under the suite. Now let's get the testng file format from its official site and add the tags and parameters to it. First, we will need to add the suite name and the expected parameters to it. Now let's add the test and add the classes to it and make the parallel tag as true. Now that we have added our test to testng XML, the only thing pending is to add the plugin in pom.xml to run this suite. So now let's add that. The plugin should be inside the build tag. Here we need to specify the path of our testng XML file. Now we are all set to run our tests. So let's run it. This might take some time. As you can see, it failed for me. The reason being this should be HTTP instead of HTTPS. Let's just cross check the files again. This looks good. Let's make it the naming convention. Here we have made a trivial mistake. The request output should be sent to the response. Now let's try to run it again. This can take some time. As you can see, the tests ran successfully. That's it guys for this video. In the next video, we'll add this project to Git and run it through Docker Jenkins. I have a separate video for Docker Jenkins setup. I will add the link in the description. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.